Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and for your very interesting speech. And I suppose in conversation, we may as well start where you left off with your speech, and you talked about the tragic history of Rwanda, the genocide that took place in 1994. I think what's remarkable is the way you have reunified the country since then, but before then it was clearly perceived to be divided along ethnic lines, and you have managed to weld together a country which isn't any longer riven in that way. Maybe you would like to explain to all of us how you've been able to do that.
Well, it hasn't been possible just because of one person, but all of us. I think we've learned our lesson. We've learned the hard way from this tragic history. And I think everyone came out agreeing that we should be trying to find all possible ways to see what we can do to bring our lives together again and our country to be normal as it should be. So it's everybody's effort. It has had to take everybody's, of course, inevitably there are different layers of leadership. There are people who play roles. I have had my own part to play, and from that we've been able to also understand that it starts with us, the problems, and we don't take too much time blaming the tragic history on the hands of others who might have had a role of one kind or another. We don't waste much time on that. We just try to see what our history is like, what went wrong, what we can do, and we proceed with that. And I think that with that spirit, we've been able to make the difference that there is today. Because you can even, I'm sure you've been there in the recent times. You've seen how even it shows on the faces of Rwandans in the energy, in what they have tried to do and try to do every day. There is that responsiveness to overcome adversity and move on. So that one is, I think we've been lucky on the other hand, because even if you have good leaders, you can have leaders, but those they lead do not respond as you would wish. But I think we have been lucky. We have had a population that also has suffered and has learned and have been shaped and informed by this very bad history. And when we are together, when we sit and say, what is our problem? This is our problem, and what can we do about it? Let's go ahead and do it. And the response has always been very good. So I think that's why I'm saying maybe it's also due partly to good luck.
So your leadership hasn't been about forcing people to do anything. It's been about understanding the spirit, the zeitgeist of the country, and being able to help to bring that together. And so leadership is about understanding the people, you're saying?
Yes, I think we learned that lesson long ago, that you don't get things done just by forcing people. It doesn't matter what or where. So even if it works, it would work for a short time. Next time it doesn't really work.
Yes.
So you are better off, and it's a lesson we have learned and benefited from when you bring people together and make them part of the process to finding any solution you want.
And when I was in Rwanda, one of the things that struck me was that you have this kind of village and suburbs, of course, in places like Kigali, but village and suburban democracy where the local communities come together on a periodic basis, once a month or so, and discuss their local issues and try to resolve them amongst themselves, which is an unusual model, certainly not one that we apply in Western countries.
In fact, our governance model is such that we have a highly decentralized system of governance. These layers where different units take care of themselves in a sense of thinking of what is it that needs to be done, what is the possible solution, and then these units keep coming together, as they grow to think of what affects a sector, what affects a district, what affects a province, and later on it grows to the national level. And it is in that sense, yes, it is both helpful in real practice, but it also helps to mobilize the minds of people as to the spirit of coming together and trying to address things together and as it happens. For example, what you've just referred to, we come together every Saturday ending the month. And we've done this now for 12 years, most likely even more. And it started with saying, where we are coming from is a very low base almost on everything. We have needed support from partners, from donors, from friends, from all kinds of. But the conversation was that, do we need donors' money to do everything, including cleaning our homesteads and making sure that even with the low levels on many things, we can still try and have clean water, have clean homes, have clean streets. These are things that are within our means. We don't have to wait until somebody shows up and say, you know what, let me pay you to go clean your homestead or your street or your. So this is how it happened. And it has become a culture now. People want to do it. They know the meaning of it. And in doing that, they come together. They also address other issues. They talk about whether there are security problems that affect the place where they live, or there is lack of this or lack of that, and they rally, they put their efforts together. In fact, those who don't participate physically even contribute some money, which later on, adds up to what is paid to people who can do the rest that hasn't been done yet. So it's not just that physical activity alone, it's also shaping the mind, and I think we are seeing the benefits already.
So one of the things that's really striking when you visit Rwanda is how incredibly neat and tidy everything is. No matter how humble the village, it's just perfectly clean. And I think the other observation is that you have very low rates of crime. And I suppose these two things come out of what you're saying, come out of people becoming proud of their local communities, working together as local communities, and making some decisions amongst themselves about the direction of their communities.
Right. That's very true. In fact, some cynics think for the streets, the towns, the homes and villages to be clean, maybe there is some machine that goes around putting people at gunpoint to do that, but it has really come out true. That's why I was saying forcing people to do things doesn't work like that. You wouldn't really have those results so it first goes into the minds of people, they see the benefits, they later on buy in, they want to do it, and once they have started, and it continues like that. So what you've just said has happened as a result of that mobilization and of people's minds and spirits, and also seeing the benefit of it. Yes, when people from wherever come and so they are amazed how the country is clean and so on and safe, and it's not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. So when people therefore hear that, they want to do even more of that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very interesting model, and one that probably can translate to a number of other countries and a number of other societies. The other thing that I suppose people would want to translate into other countries is your rate of economic growth. You've averaged a rate of growth of somewhere between 7 and 8% over the last 10 years, which I don't know if that's the highest rate of growth of any country in Africa, but it'd be pretty close to it. And people now refer to Rwanda as the Singapore of Africa. So I think that means doing really well. Tell us, how have you achieved these high rates of economic growth? Is that connected to the attitudes of the community that we've been talking about? Or do you have some very substantial macroeconomic policies that have achieved this?
Well, first of all, I wish the comparison between us and Singapore was true. So we are trying. We are trying our best, given our circumstances, our context. We keep trying.
Well, Singapore didn't start off rich, Mr. President.
I guess so. So, and it has the economic growth we have constantly registered has something to do with the earlier elements of a conversation we had. When people are at the center of every activity and they feel they want to make progress, they become more receptive to some of the things that are out there being talked about or referred to as things that can make a difference in their lives and for them. For example, in fact, it is maybe in the last close to 10 years when our country ever in its history registered growth in agriculture. Just the last 10 years. And this came about, because largely the whole big percentage of the population is involved in agriculture. Of course, but historically, it has been subsistence agriculture. Even then, really, very little to get from it. So with the policies we put in place and then mobilize the people who are already in the activity that is supposed to benefit them, that they're the only thing, it's the only thing they know or depend on, with the new methods, with technology, with different inputs that were availed. We've seen for the first time in the last 10 years growth in agriculture. So it's this putting people at the center of everything we are trying to do, and working together with them and thinking together and identifying what that happens really at every level that we have seen this kind of thing. So even in other things, we've seen businesses established, they thrive. So people now understand that doing business is a good thing. It's something that is going to benefit them. It's going to develop them. So now we have seen people, we have seen entrepreneurs develop. Then the investments we also tried to make in the area of infrastructure that will also, in the end, facilitate business, and then, what is going on across the world, the ease of doing business, how do people do business? Since we have identified that doing business is good for people, for the economies, how do we make it easy for Rwandans to do business, but also do business with others, either neighboring countries and beyond, and back and forth. So this has been behind really the constant growth. It is some prudence, some accountability, some, the governance part of it, the spirit of the people, and then the activity in real sectors that can continue has resulted into this, and we have seen it year in, year out. So it's easy to believe that this is the reason.
A lot of countries suffer. One of the causes of economic failure is corruption. So dealing with corruption's been an important part of your presidency, I know. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the method of doing that.
Yes.
I never met a president who didn't tell me he was or she was against corruption.
Yes, that's true.
But I have met quite a lot who haven't succeeded in fighting corruption, to put it politely.
Yeah.
So in your case, you seem to have had a fair degree of success. How have you done that? And that might be a model for elsewhere as well, if you've succeeded.
This issue of a model, you actually touched it. Even if you said, I'm going to put this model or to work along the lines of this model and expect the results, it's not always going to turn out to be like that. Because of what you've just said, there isn't a leader you have met that doesn't say corruption is bad, you're trying to fight corruption. So, but at the same time, not all of them, or actually most of them maybe have different levels of success, even when they have been saying the right thing. So, but let me talk about our own situation. That's the one I'm conversant with. And that is from the outset. Like those leaders you've talked to and many others you haven't, have understood that corruption is a bad thing. So we went ahead and therefore said, it's not enough to know that corruption is a bad thing. We all know, but we need to do something to make sure that we actually fight corruption. And that is to encourage, to put in place systems that actually ensure accountability. That's one part of ensuring that you are fighting corruption, there must be accountability. And accountability must be at all levels, must be with all people involved. If it's a ministry, if it is a local government official, they need to be held accountable, especially for the resources that go through their hands. These resources must be deployed to do what they are intended to do, and it's not for them to put in their pockets. And if they do that, then, and they are found out, except those that don't get to be known, but if they are known, then they answer for it through the courts of law. But fighting corruption is not easy. And I can understand why you'll find failures almost everywhere about that. It's because it doesn't just become accountability issue or corruption per se. It starts getting mixed up with politics. And especially when in holding people accountable, it's some held accountable and not others. Then politics will come in. Because if I'm held accountable for getting involved in corruption, and I want to use it or to portray that as having been persecuted. You know, somebody can even say, no, this one was held accountable because he's opposed to the president. And then because, oh, okay, so the president is holding people accountable or pursuing people because they don't like him or because they oppose him. And then, so people start finding excuses to explain why they should not be held accountable for the corruption they're involved in. And now, depending on the level at which that happens and the scale, then gradually corruption finds its roots in the society. Yes. So, well, but if you are consistent and if you are not going to be selective, and in fact always starting with the top, if you know, we have places where if it is a minister, a general, the army or the police, you know, these are people up there. So, and the lower people are looking at them. They know who gets involved in what, really, even if they don't say. So they see everybody getting away with it. They see people amassing wealth without clear sources. The people in revenue collection services, they see people, just young people, becoming billionaires because he's an official of, and one thing leads to another, it keeps growing and growing, then, and there is lack of accountability, then you know that it is entrenched and it will be difficult to uproot it. So we started a little bit earlier when we were coming almost from nothing to what we are building today, emphasizing and talking again to people, saying, oh, I'm not trying even to dramatize that, but in our case, sometimes we would be having a conversation back in the country and saying, you know what, for us, we are not even spoiled in terms of resources. So there is actually nothing to steal. If you steal from the very little, you are easily exposed. So, but at the same time, the impact is very high. So please, let's try to make sure that whatever we have, it spreads and has impact on the country. And we said, therefore, whoever. But some countries are so wealthy and so on, so maybe they are spoiled for that. And It is easy to grab here and maybe nobody notices it. But in our case, if you do that, then you are noticed for...
Part of the problem is that the money gets, that should be going into something fundamental in a society like education and health gets channeled out, so their budgets are too small in the areas that really matter, and the process of development is inhibited very substantially.
Absolutely.
I just want to, before throwing it open to the floor here, if you want to ask your own questions, think about that. But I just want to end by asking you a question about multilateral institutions. So just to go to foreign policy, you were the chair of the African Union, and I guess through that lead up to negotiating the Pan-African Free Trade Agreement, which, as you said in your speech, comes into force next year. Could you just say a little bit about your leadership of the African Union when you went in to be the chair of it, what you had in mind and how you led an organisation like that? And then perhaps you can segue into talking a bit about your chairmanship of Kagame of the Commonwealth, which starts in June of this year, you taking over from Boris Johnson.
Well, to begin with the African Union, I was honored to be the chair of the African Union in 2018. And when I became the chair, following particular other two leaders, one of Chad and Guinea, that we had been working closely with, and in anticipation, because we can easily tell who is going to become the chair next year and so on. It is rotational, it was across the region. So I had time to prepare myself to say, what is going to be my contribution when I become the chair of the African Union? And through these conversations we had with those who were there before me, so one of the things we identified, in fact, it followed in 2016, there was a meeting in Kigali. We hosted the African Union Summit. And there I was also suggested for leading the reform, because we could see in Africa, the African institutions needed reform in terms of effectiveness, in terms of efficiency, and so on and so forth. And uniting Africa, bringing it together as a force, instead of 55 countries, to try and see if we can have unity across the continent or sub-regions and so on. So as I was leading that reform process, that's also later on, after 2 years, I became the chair of the African Union. So, yes, we worked with many other leaders, including the leader of Niger, President Issouf. So this idea of, yes, but talking about unity, the best way to have unity is to also be able to encourage. There existed already the regional economic communities, North, Central, South, West, Eastern Africa. And we said, for this to be successful, we need really to find not only within these regional economic communities, free trade going on among them, but also across these regional economic communities. And so that's how it happened. And so when I became the chair, I drove that hard, and combined with the responsibility of the reform, I had a number of ideas I suggested to. I worked with a team. There was a team that was supporting me, drawn from across the continent, from professionals, technocrats in different fields. So we made this. In fact, there were also criticisms against that. From the beginning, it was like, President Kagame is is insensitive to politics. He just wants to again, I will tell them it's not a bad thing sometimes to put politics aside and do things the way they should be done. If you want efficiency, if you want effectiveness, sometimes you, but that's just a side issue. So eventually, because I think Africans also needed it, they understood it, it was easy once the suggestion was there to see people coalescing around that idea. And now we have 29 countries that have even ratified this agreement to create a free trade area. We have around 50 who have signed up, committed themselves. They have to just go through other processes in their own countries to ensure that they also ratify. I think it's in force already. Actually, trading is going to start this year in July. So we just have to make sure we keep doing what we need to do, all of us. This is going to be very beneficial. It's going to be the largest free trade area in the whole world. And once we are able to demonstrate that, look at what we are missing, or have been missing for decades. Had we done this long ago, we would be so far away in terms of benefits and realizing all this. So that, I think, tends to push people to do what they need to do and do it fast. So we are seeing good progress, and I think now from that, I think we are very happy. In June, we will host the Commonwealth Leaders Summit. We are the youngest member of the Commonwealth, Rwanda is. So we are honored and blessed to be the host for this conference this time around. We want to see that it becomes successful, and for it to be successful, we have to work with the member states and do some of the things that need to be done ourselves to be able to host this and allow the interactions to be productive. So and during this time around, as I said yesterday, UK Africa conference becoming successful was could see business leaders, government leaders, and they were present, they were expressing themselves, what is needed, and from each other, and so on. I think it's a good way to go. We just can't keep trying to see if we can maximize on the benefits.
Well, we look forward to the CHOGM in the middle of the year, and as you were saying in your speech, we at King's have developed a civil service training program, which I think will be very attractive to the Commonwealth heads of government at that time. Well, we've got about 10 minutes. Yes, the hands have gone up before I've even finished my sentence, which is good. We've got about 10 minutes for questions before the President has to leave. So the gentleman, yes. Yeah, that's it.
Good morning, Mr. President. My name is Silvano Zwekesa, PhD student at the African Leadership Center here at King's, and I'm from Kenya. My question goes to the East African community, which is increasingly involved in governance within the region. And you initially spoke about how to convince people to buy into some of these ideas. Therefore, how are you going to convince your fellow counterparts on increasing awareness among the citizens of the East African nations to buy into the EAC, to avoid perhaps the pitfalls of what the UK have had with Brexit?
Well, one sure thing
I'm
is...
surprised Brexit hasn't come up before. I thought I'd avoid it, but one of our students has got...
I don't know much about Brexit. We can talk about East Africa. But one sure thing is we are going to try in the East African region to talk about these things that are raised in your question. And the most important thing, if they are there being discussed, and currently I'm the chair of the East African community as well, but I may not be as successful to whatever level one might think. Putting together and making the East African community do some of the things maybe I succeed with in my own little domain, that is governance in Rwanda. East African community becomes a bigger thing, and it has different countries have their leaders, they have their different things. So we just work across and talk to each other to see how we can keep benefiting from the common things we can do together, the differences. Sometimes people see things differently, that's okay, and we keep trying to find a way forward. So, but the point you are making is very clear for East African community or in a community to work, there has to be that buy-in, there's no question about it. And the success will be equal to how much you have made people buy into that.
Yes,
Jack McConnell from the House of Lords. I'm interested in your thoughts on responsibility to protect, which was really an initiative that, in part, came out of the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, agreed in 2005. And I think Ban Ki-moon said in 2011 that it was already saving thousands of lives around the world with various interventions. And we've seen absolute carnage in the 9 years since. And I've heard many people say over the last few years that R2P is dead, that there is no international appetite for this anymore, and we need to think again. But I would be more interested in your thoughts on that than anybody else, frankly, and I'd be interested to hear what you think could be done. Where are we just now on the international community's responsibility to protect citizens and nations that are facing genocide, and what could be done to reinvigorate the principles of R2P?
Well, my thoughts on the responsibility to protect are as good as yours. But what I would say, in fact, Rwanda were part of the sponsorship of the resolution for the responsibility to protect the UN, together with the United States. And we have been, from that time, and under the leadership of Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General then, well, we've been talking a lot about it. But I think you know, and which you have just said, in the world, first of all, there's a lot of talk of the right things and short of doing the right things. That is one. The second is there are people who decide what happens in the world sometimes. And when they have not decided, or they decide along the lines of sometimes what they refer to as their own interests, it doesn't necessarily go in the right direction. But still it happens. You can't stop it. In fact, so mine would are just thoughts. There is little we can do about it. We are only a player when we are allowed to contribute. We don't have much weight on that. But the responsibility to protect, first of all, it was a good thing that it was thought about and some things were done and a resolution has been passed. But we see, indeed, in many places, the things that should have been done either to prevent or later on to deal with what is already happening. There are still as many failures, if not worse, than there was before that resolution. So it's very difficult for me to give you, I mean, you can see things play out in Libya. Just to get one example of the many. It is going to be difficult to have that country come together and be a nation again. I'm not intending to predict bad things, but I'm just talking about what I am seeing as a small country from somewhere.
It's a good question to ask the President of Rwanda, though, because as an idea, it very much came out of 1994. And my predecessor as Australian Foreign Minister, Gareth Evans, was one of the great drivers of the idea. So one more question, because we're absolutely running out of time. The woman at the back then.
Thank you. Sally Marlowe from the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience. And my question is about you. What is it that drives you personally?
It's a great question from the place you come from.
Showing the breadth.
Why don't you tell us?
Showing the breadth of King's disciplines here.
Yeah, it's difficult for me to say it. Maybe it is many things, but I've been born and grew up in problems. I think sometimes problems either break you or make you into, somebody who can be able to stand up to them. And I might have been lucky to not be broken by problems, but rather to be shaped in my thinking and actions to stand up to them. Maybe that is the only way I can answer it.
Well, Mr. President, time has come to an end, and I just want to say what a great privilege it has been for all of us to hear what you have to say today, and
Thank you.
to answer our questions, my questions, and the audience's questions. So, wholeheartedly, we very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's a great honour to have you.
It's a pleasure for me. Thank you.